Good morning. Today, what I want to do is walk through how to set up costs for actual and average cost items. Now, I've done another video that walks through how to set up standard cost items, but actual and average a little bit different. And so there are some parts of the same and some that are different. So first thing we're going to do is talk about cost elements and cost element groups, because you need to set those up so that you can set up the overheads for actual and average and what's called defined accounting overhead rules. And then we'll show you how you set up labor costs, which is the same as in standard. We have to do a cost scenario. And then the basic premise in actual and average cost is that costs are updated or created upon receipt. Either a purchase order, a work order, or even a transfer order can create or update costs. So we'll walk through all of that. As always, links to different videos. I've done some of these things in the past. I've done an accounting overhead rules video about how to set up overhead on purchase material for average and actual. But here we'll talk about how to do it for manufactured. And I'll actually walk through a little bit of how to receive and run invoices for purchase orders as well as work orders. And if you know how to do those things, that's great. You can just fast forward through that parts of the video. So again, the first thing we're going to do is go through is cost elements and cost element groups. Cost elements are the labor, material, overhead elements that you set up. I've done a video on that. You see that here in the PowerPoint. You can find links to both the PowerPoint for that as well as the video for that. And again, as well as accounting, defining accounting overhead rules. I like to say overhead accounting rules, but they didn't write it that way. So there you go. So the first thing we're going to do is jump over into, if I can find it in my machine here. What we're doing with cost element groups and why it's important to set those up. So these are set up in setup and maintenance. And I like to simply go to the search function over here on the right and type cost element. Now, most likely, you already have cost elements set up, but just to kind of show you what those are. These are the different cost elements like labor, material, overhead. We might call them, I don't know, direct labor or material or freight or whatever we want to call them. So we have to set those up. But most likely, if you're at this point, you're already set those up. But the manage overhead cost element groups is where it's important. And I'm going to sort this down to just what we're dealing with today in this U.S. operations cost org. The main premise here is that when we set these up, I set up for labor is I'm setting a cost element. So I create a group name, give it a description. So these are my labor cost elements. And then down here is where I set the different elements that are going to be part of that base. So this is, remember, overheads are bases and pools. And so I'm setting up what are my base. I can add other elements in here if I want to. It's just however you wish to do this. So I'm just doing my overheads based on resources, labor and machine. So I could add a resource here and I could say I want machine. But I would like to have two separate ones, one for machines and one for labor so that I can attach different rates to those. So that's where we have to set up cost element groups because they're important to do your overheads. Remember, in standard cost, overheads are based on labor hours, labor rates. Then when you set up overheads in a cost scenario, you can do things like planned overhead on items and things that flow through material. But here we're dealing with something a little bit different. So once those are set up, then we can go in and define accounting overhead rules, which is done in cost accounting. So we'll go into cost accounting. And what you're going to see today too is kind of a hybrid between Redwood and regular screens. Some of the Redwood screens are still struggling in navigation. And so I've elected to turn those off for the purposes of what we're doing here. But overhead accounting rules is here. If you're in the old world, view all actions and you scroll down and it's in the item cost, overhead accounting rules. Either way, get you where we need to go. And our system comes because, we have folks setting up demo information. I've actually set up two different ones here. Like I said, one for labor and one for machine. So we'll go take a look at these. We'll just open up the first one here and kind of take a look at what it is. Of course, we give it a name, a cost org, cost book, an inventory org, and then expense pools are important. Expense pools is part of the key. So I can't have two overhead rules on the same expense pool. So when you're setting up your expense pools, keep that in mind. And then where are the costs going to be stored on my item? That's what this cost element here is for. This is where I'm going to put these. So since I'm dealing with labor overhead here, I'm putting it in resource overhead as a cost element that's already been set up. Now, the next thing we have to worry about is what transactions. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a new one so you kind of see the selections. Again, I like to start things that I write with my initials so I can find them again. Financials, Atlanta. And I'm going to have to give this, I'm going to pull out an expense pool I haven't used before. And I'm going to put this in resource overhead. Transaction groups. So which transaction groups am I going to want this particular overhead calculation to go to or to be based on? And you can see here inter-org transfers, inventory purchase, sales orders, etc. So what we're dealing with is, since I want this to be part of my manufacturing overheads, I select work order inventory transactions. If I wanted to put overhead on purchase items, I would select purchase order transactions as an example. Or if I'm doing overhead on sales items, it just depends on what you want to do. So inventory, and then the transaction types. You can do overhead at different places. But I'm just dealing with upon completion. So it's this one here, work in process product completion. So I can select that. Now you can narrow this down to item categories or even item numbers if you choose. So those are options that you can base it on. And then my cost basis, if it's per lot, it'll take this and spread it over the different lots. Per transaction, meaning this cost is for this set of transactions. Percentage value is what I'm using, which is a percentage of my base, which I've defined here. In a minute, I'll show you where the cost estimates come in, or unit. So if I use unit, that means it's a dollar amount per unit. So different ways that you can do that. I'm going to do percentage, and based on what? So these are those cost element groups that I set up earlier. So let's say we're going to put this on labor overhead. So this is everything that falls in the labor cost element, is how I set this up. And then how is it going to be? Are you going to expense this overhead, or are you going to put it in inventory? And I always like to put it back in inventory. So cost follows revenue. And then the next step is down here at the bottom. We have to have a start and end date on the rate that we're going to apply. I don't put an end date. If I choose to change the rate, you can come and put an end date in and create a new line with a new start date. And then what is your percentage of labor in this case going to be? And then we would apply that. So that's how the Redwood screens work. And then you can save and close. I am not going to save this one, but that's how we set up overhead accounting rules. Now, when you get done, if it comes back, here we go. You know these are active. You can activate or deactivate them because it says here, hey, they're active, right? So whenever we run the cost process, which used to be called, review or create cost accounting distributions, now it's called, who knows what it's called. It's under run process controls. But anyway, it will calculate these overheads every time a receipt is done for these items. Now, for the purposes of this presentation, I have created a couple different sets of items. I've created a set of actual items and a set of average items. The PowerPoint goes through the actual items. What I'm doing here, we'll use the average items. It doesn't matter, the processes are the same. So what we've done so far is we've set up the overhead, the cost element groups, and now we've showed how you can set up your overhead rules. And my overhead rules here are active, and so you'll see them as we go through. Now, the next thing we have to set up, so we set up overhead. Now we're going to go and we're going to set up labor. So labor is back into cost accounting again. And what I'm doing now is I'm going to set up resource rates for labor and machines. And so we go into, if I can find it, manage cost scenarios. Here we go. So this is going to be non-Redwood because I like the screens better. And I started one yesterday. So we're going to go to this scenario. And it has today as the effective date. These are the two parent items that I've set up, ACT for actual and AVG for average, just to do that. So you set up your cost scenario, you save it, then you come back in and you say manage resource rate. So this is exactly how you would do it if you were setting a standard cost item. And in here you can see I've already set up machine, but I'm going to add, I have 4 resources. The LCD machine was one, and these are in Atlanta. And my resource is technician level 1. Going to add a cost. And this is actually, it's labor. Yep. Expense pool. Don't know why they have an expense pool on labor. Expense pools, we need to set them up. They're required for some things, but they don't do anything yet. That's been the case for 10 years. So hopefully one day they'll make that work. So we're going to set a labor rate for this one. I'm going to create another one, still in Atlanta. And this is going to be tech level 2. If I can find him. Tech level 2. Labor. I'm just putting rates in. And then the last one that we need to set up is actually quality assurance. And so these are the labor resources, that you would set up on your work definition. So, you go in, you set your work definition, you put in the different operation steps, you add resources to it, you add your material, bill of materials to it, etc. So that's where these resources come from. But we have to set rates on them here. So we're going to save and close. This is one of the navigation things that drive me nuts when I say save and close instead of going back to manage cost scenarios that brings it back to the main page. But nevertheless, so here's my test 01. I've set up my labor. So now it's simply, you roll it up, which is kind of nonsensical, but you kind of got to do this. It's really not rolling up anything. We'll let that run. Shouldn't take long. Yeah, watching scheduled processes is about as exciting as watching paint dry. There we go. Now it's completed. And so then what we do is we go ahead and update standard, which will publish these labor rates. So that's how we get labor rates in there. So I'm not going to sit and wait for that to run, but it'll run and it'll post those out there. So we're going to go ahead and save and close this. And so now we've set up 2 of the 3 pieces, right? We've set up overheads, we've set up labor, and now we get to set up material. This is kind of where we have to create receipts to set up the material. So if you're setting up prototyping or testing or something like that, you're going to want to create purchase orders and work orders. And so I'll walk through that. And this is the part, if you know how to do those things, you may not want to spend time in this section. You can scroll through to the end, where I'll show the item cost when we get done. But for the purpose of what we're doing here, I'm going to walk through this. So the first thing I'll do is material, raw materials. So to do that, I'm going to go over into purchasing, kind of show you how some purchase orders already out here. Go into procurement, purchase orders. Manage orders. So you can see here that I have some purchase orders set up. So we'll take a look at our average cost item. Open this one up real quick. And then what we'll do is we'll go receive it and create an invoice for it. Okay. So these are my average cost raw materials that I've set up. You can see that I've set up prices. I do not have purchase requisitions on these. I've just put in the amounts, my pricing of what I wanted. I didn't bother to create a purchase requisition. So again, we have a purchase order out here. It's ready to go. So the next step is actually we're going to go receive this purchase order. Now, if you haven't seen the purchase receipt screens or the transaction screens in the new Redwood, this is your chance. They've split inventory management into 2 sections, inventory management and then inventory execution. So where you need to go into the execution side to be able to receive purchase orders. So we have all these different kinds of transactions, and they did this so it would be easy on smart barcode devices or iPads or tablets or whatever. But we're going to go into the receive goods, which is receive expected shipments in the old world. Get our organization name, pops in. Now here is where if we have a barcode device, you can scan the barcode device, but I'm just going to type in my purchase order number. It comes up with the 5 line items. I have it set up so it shows me the receipt quantity. That's an option. You can turn that off if you wish. You can scan in the location down here where I'm typing. You can scan that in, or you can type it in. And you'll notice as I set each one, the action required flag goes away on that line item. And I'm tabbing to get through that, by the way. And last one here. Okay, so I've set this up. Now I've got to receive them. Everything looks good. You know, this is where you can put in tracking and packing and pictures and all those kinds of cool things. We'll just go ahead and submit this for our purposes. And then it comes back to if I want to do another receipt transaction. Eventually, there we go. I could put another and go forward, but we're done. So we'll back out of this to this page. And so now what we've done, I have the purchase order. We've now received it. And so the next step is actually to create a AP invoice. Now, for those of you who are not familiar much with the financial side of things, we're going to go into payables, go into invoices, and I'm going to create an invoice for this purchase order that we just received. Here, create an invoice. And so I put in my invoice number, tab through that, and it'll bring back the information off the PO. I always need a invoice number, and I always guess at an amount because the system will tell me the amount here in a minute. And then to do the matching, I click this little arrow here. Here's what's been received. You can see here it's got my PO number, my line numbers, my different item numbers, etc. I just received this, so I know they're all received. And so I'm going to go ahead and receive these, or show that that's what's being paid. It brings in the lines. And so the next step is I need to calculate taxes, because taxes turned on in this particular organization. And then the amount field here has to match the total here for this to be able to be posted. So once I've done my tax calculation, since I don't have an actual invoice in front of me and I'm just setting up stuff, notice down here, my green arrow pops in. And so the system has calculated what I said my invoice is worth. I need to validate it, and then I'll post it. And I've showed you how to enter an invoice. And we'll post that. If there's issues, it'll come up and flag you. Right here, it kind of tells you what stage you're in. So this has been completed. I'm going to go ahead and save and close this out. So we've now taken a purchase order, we've received it, and we've got an invoice for it. So we have costs now for those items. The next step is manufacturing. So we have in work execution, we're going to go to manufacturing work orders. And I did enter a couple work orders yesterday. So you can see I have a work order here for my average cost item for 4 units. So, and this work order has been released. So we have to go to review dispatch list, and we're going to report against this work order. A couple different ways to report against it. I can do a quick complete, This is also known as back flushing. It'll take back, it'll just, whatever is in the bill, whatever is in the work definition, it'll automatically select those. I tend to like to walk through complete with detail so I can see what it's doing. So I'll probably do a combination here because there's three operation steps on this. We've got to do this 3 times. And it tells you right here that we're on operation step 10. I'll do next. These are the components that are needed. Do next. These are the hours. Whoops. I'm going to change those. You can just override them. You can also set up resource instances, names of equipment, names of individuals. I have not done that. So that's how we do a quick complete. If you have slot control or serial control items, you may need to manually report. And then you see that this has skipped to the next operation step. And so for these, I'm just going to say quick complete for time's sake. Okay, so this has been completed. And we can come back to work orders. I'm going to refresh this. And now this is flag is changed to completed. Now the last step to get cost accounting to work is this work order needs to be closed. So we highlight it, we go to mass actions, we say close. And work orders will not cost completely, and variance is calculated in a standard cost world or update until they're actually closed. Once they're closed, the cost processor will come in and do its magic and and cost everything and calculate all the variances. So now that we've done all of these, I'm going to come back here in the cost accounting. The next step is actually we've got to run the cost processes. And so I've included this in the PowerPoint. I've also included the document of, suggested times and recommendations if you're running this in a production environment of how often these processors can run, and you can modify it to fit so that these run in the background. You don't have to run them individually. But for the purposes of today, and for the purposes of time for you guys, I'm going to pause the recording and I'm going to go run these 6 processes, and then we'll come back over to cost accounting, and we're going to check what the costs look like. So I'll be right back. Okay, as I see with the magic of television, we have run all the cost processes. It took about 20 minutes to get all those run. But for you, it's been instantaneous. Hey, the joys of time travel, right? So what I want to do now is I want to go in and show you the outcome of everything that we've done. So I'll go into cost accounting. And go into review item costs. Now, this is another one where I've turned off the Redwood screen because some of the functionality is not in the Redwood screen, which is unfortunate. Have talked to development about that. And so, like I said, my average cost item, which we've been thinking with today, is AVG 475-1100. I just copied it over from a standard item we use in the demo environment. And I'm going to click search. We can see it's here. I've got an average cost here. We can see that it is an average cost item because that's how I've set up my cost, my valuation structure. And so we'll go ahead and click into view transaction costs. We're going to see a couple line items because I ran this yesterday. I always test things out before I present them to you guys. And I'm going to highlight here. First off is, we've got the graph down here. We can see machine overhead and resource overhead. Those are the 2 that we had over in accounting overhead rules. and highlight this. And I'm going to detach just because it's so much more real estate to deal with. So we have our resources, this is labor and machine, and then we have our overheads that have been calculated on those. And then, of course, our material costs based on the purchase order and the work order receipt. So again, and then it averages it all. This is the one I ran yesterday. Of course, I ran different hours on it, so it's going to be slightly different. But that's the purpose of average cost, right? We average it all out. Now, to show you this also works on actual cost, I'm going to put in my actual cost item, CT. Now, actual cost, remember, creates cost layers for each receipt. And in here, we'll see various cost layers in here. Again, we'll detach this for viewing purposes. And then I have my resource, labor, and machine. I have my overheads for, this is when I was just running just resource overhead. But nevertheless, the process is the same for average and actual cost items. So again, what we've done today is we walk through setting up costs for average or actual cost items. We walk through how to set up overheads using overhead accounting overhead rules. See how we say it backwards. We've talked about how to set your resource rates, labor and machine in cost scenarios. Then we've gone ahead and received a purchase order, created work orders and received them, ran all the cost processes, and we show you the results. Again, everything in different links to the different videos that I've done on the pieces of this will be in the links below. As always, I hope this has been helpful. Thank you.